backwards there.
Welcome into the Hot Read podcast here on a Wednesday, January the 22nd. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at Broadway Sports Media and 440 Sports. You can follow me on Twitter at JT_Ruhnke. And I'm once again joined on this very, very busy day by none other than the amazing and wonderful Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief of Sobros Network, one half of Football and Other F Words, and co-writer over at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, how are you doing today, my friend?
You know what?
Well, as Stoney begins the show by muting himself, as he says, you know what, and then proceeds to not say anything. So we will wait for, oh, there we go. I could hear it for a second.
Something's going on my
There we go. There we go.
I'm back.
I can hear you now. You are back, my friend. How are you doing today?
Doing well.
Is it the cat? Are we blaming the cat today?
It's not the cat. It's not the cat. The cat is actually asleep in a box in our guest room that we usually reserve for our Christmas tree. So we haven't put it up yet. It's still out on the bed, and he's like, I'm gonna get in this box and sleep all afternoon. No, I don't know what's going on. It sounds like maybe some cables came loose, or maybe I didn't plug everything in as it's supposed to be. But what I was saying was, it is a day that ends in Y, so naturally I'm running around with my hair on fire as usual.
Yeah, that is true. People were asking, Dada Stoney, you are late. JT
I was late.
Stuck in the mayo jar with Easton at the fridge. That could very much be the case. But no, my friends, it was that you had your tea, your physical tea, your drinking tea ready to go.
Listen,
not the hot, juicy gossip like we're going to get into today.
No, I ain't got no hot, juicy gossip. No, but I got to have my tea because I've been out in the cold today. It's very frigid here in Nashville and it's starting to wear down on my throat a little bit. So I was like, you know what? I gotta get my throat coated properly for this show.
Wonderful. We love to see it. And if you are watching us here live on Twitter or Facebook and want to join the conversation, like Adam and Zedine and Eddie and Roshan and all the wonderful people here today, do us a favor and head on over to the 440 Sports and Broadway Sports Media YouTube channels where you can join the conversation. Also, got to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsor, ML Rose, with 7 amazing locations here in the greater Nashville area: Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose, 8th Avenue, Mount Juliet, Sylvan Park, and coming soon to Inglewood on Gallatin Pike. Thank you to ML Rose for sponsoring the show. Definitely got to get out there one more time before we hit the road for the Senior Bowl next week. Super exciting. Can't wait to dive into all of that. But so many questions and comments here in the comment section. As Eddie says, anybody know who has final decision making? Not sure that was properly addressed enough times today. A little tongue in cheek there, but yes, we are going to get into all of the things we heard today at Mike Borgonzi's introductory press conference, as well as a off the record, off the books kind of. Don't want you to really talk about it too much because they wouldn't let us video or audio from it. A conversation with Chad Brinker today. Can't wait to get into all of those things. And we'll start with, just some quick thoughts about Mike Borgonzi as their next general manager. First of all, I have to say, thick Boston accent, which I think is very fun. Talking a lot about his daughter and things like that. It was very interesting to see. I know people have already started. A lot of people have started to already go with like some mafia Goodfellas type takes with the new nickname. I'm not in that business, obviously. Stoney, that is more your creative direction there with your Let Borgonzi scheme and whatnot. But we heard a lot from Mike Borgonzi, and we also heard a lot from Chad Brinker, but no Amy Adams Strunk, who was not around. And we'll get into what that all means here. Let's start with Chad Brinker, though. A little bit about the time we had with him today. It's actually real quick. Team Ramrod saying the way he said Burrow was my favorite part of the day. It was kind of mine too. Literally, hey, the vibes are high, but that doesn't mean that we should buy all in, because there definitely are some things about this press conference that still, at the bottom line, even though, there are a lot of people around here saying that it didn't matter today, it's nice to have the vibes feel so good as they did today. Once again, getting into the honeymoon phase, just like we did with Brian Callahan. But at the bottom line, we've been around this rodeo now 3 times that we should know better to know that the results have to start coming. And so what does that mean for this team? It really started the day with meeting with Chad Brinker. It was a little bit different. We were escorted from the media workroom. It was kind of like a Titans follow the leader, line leader field trip day around Ascension St. Thomas Sports Park today, as we were led to a conference room where myself and the rest of the media, literally, we were sitting around like a boardroom style table with bunch of swivel chairs, whatever you might imagine a business room might be. We all sat there, put our phones and our recorders in the middle, and Chad Brinker comes in and sits down at this table with us. And it was more of just a conversation with him. And it was a little bit more, pointed and knives out-y, I guess you could call it, about, just what has gone on in a couple weeks coming up to this meeting in this introductory press conference. But I do think at the end of the day, and this is what I came away with it, we finally have kind of a clear vision and can move on to the next step of the offseason, which is the Mike Borgonzi era with Chad Brinker as his boss. Amy Adams Strunk seemingly maybe trying to attempt to take a back seat in all of this and just be the owner and maybe get out of those meddling ways that we have seen her time and time again do over the past 2 years. But we'll start with, one of the biggest questions that I think after we heard from him last week, talking about, or 2 weeks ago, I guess now, talking about, hey, Rand Carthon had to go because a 3-14 record is simply unacceptable. And the major questions that kind of arose from those sentiments was, hey, Rand Carthon was here, but also Chad Brinker, yourself, and Brian Callahan were also there, but they didn't get the can. So what exactly, what was the thought process behind that? And we got, I have the transcript of that conversation. So I'm going to, for the most part, read a lot of what he had to say verbatim here. I know we were doing a lot of paraphrasing. He was talking a lot. We did our best today to kind of take the most important parts of what he was saying and put them out on Twitter. But obviously we did not get the transcript until later. So we did ask him on the matter of, why did Chad Brinker and Brian Callahan stay? But, Rand Carthon had to go. And so Brinker opened up first and foremost by saying, yeah, I don't know what I'm supposed to say there, really. Amy Adams Strunk asked me to kind of lead the search, and I'm our football executive that she wants me to kind of lead this organization. So that's what I put out there, which was, straight from Chad Brinker. It seems like Amy Adams Strunk asked them to lead the GM search and also to lead this organization. We heard this earlier in the comments we heard from Burke Nihill and Chad Brinker, that it seems like from a business side of it, everything's going through Burke Nihill. When we hear from Chad Brinker, everything, for football operations and the actual football, it'll all be through Brinker. Once again, fans can just kind of come to the kind of conclusion that we are not going to hear from Amy Adams Strunk directly anytime soon. If we hadn't heard from her before this, we are definitely not going to hear from her now until maybe, they actually start winning again, which Paul Karski had a very tongue-in-cheek question to ask Brinker at the end that I might bring up.
Shocker.
Yeah. So Brinker goes on to say, she asked me to do that, so I'm doing the job. And I'm going to do the job the best that I can. And the first step in that was finding a general manager. And I think that's why I was so aggressive in attacking this process, because there's 2 teams, now 3, lol Jags, with open general manager positions. And I wanted to get ahead of them and try to find us the best general manager candidate we can possibly find. And it seems like they went out and got the best of the group. Obviously, some of their finalists, like John Spytek, also getting a job with the Raiders earlier today. I don't believe I saw anything on the Jets, but they have an opening. And then, of course, as well, the Jaguars have an opening here. But by and large, it does really feel like the Titans, in kind of getting Rand Carthon out of the picture and working fast, have landed themselves with a top-tier veteran that most people believe is the best, I guess, candidate for any of these jobs, but he lands with Tennessee. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, the difference in the introductory Rand Carthon presser and this one. I don't think you can watch Mike Borgonzi and think this guy's not ready, this guy's not polished. I mean, he looks, a seasoned executive at this point, a real scout, a football guy. Listening to him talk about how they wanted to build this team was, some really encouraging stuff. Now, it does feel a little honeymoon period, and I will say, JT, that the honeymoon period never ends when you're constantly divorcing and remarrying. So I guess we'll just keep this train rolling. But I do think that Borgonzi probably was the most qualified of the guys that were on the market, and for them to bring him to Nashville, which he sounds like he's a big Nashville guy too, as he asked about, why Tennessee, why take this job? He mentioned a lot of the cliche stuff, ownership, fans, blah, blah, blah. But then he's like, come on, it's Nashville. It's Nashville. So I think I think he came away largely impressive and informative today.
Yeah. So that kind of sort of feels like it answers the question of, why did only Rand Carthon go? And it truly believes, or seemingly, I've come to the conclusion that I believe it really came down to Amy Adams Strunk wanted Chad Brinker to be this executive and move in a different direction. Obviously, Chad Brinker and Brian Callahan have seemingly been pretty aligned through this process, and it was clear that the odd man out was going to be Rand Carthon, which means they had to go find this new general manager. They have, and now we can get to the structure of all of these things, which he kind of laid out perfectly, I think, for us in this meeting, where it is, it is a linear down the line. It is Amy Adams Strunk, Chad Brinker reports to Amy Adams Strunk. Borgonzi reports to Chad Brinker. So Borgonzi's boss is Chad Brinker. And then Brian Callahan's boss is Borgonzi, and so on and so forth up the ladder there. We asked him if he thought that this changed at all, from what they had with Rand Carthon to now. This is what he had to say on that topic, in which he says, I don't think the structure hasn't, I don't think, and then paused and said, the structure hasn't changed. We've still got the same structure. I think all those are unique to their respective organizations of how they want to do it. And this is the way that we're going to structure this. We believe this is the right structure for us. So I don't know how you want me to answer that, but I'm just telling you, this is the structure and this is how we're going to operate. And so, a little bit confusing there, because then, it does feel like Chad Brinker it brings in that notion that what we've all come to kind of realize, that Chad Brinker kind of usurped Rand Carthon in power and became that top executive that now was Rand Carthon's boss all along. And now they bring in their own, Brinker brings in yet another one that from the get-go, Chad Brinker will be the boss of Mike Borgonzi. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, and we'll get into what that means for final say and breaking ties and whatnot later. But when he continues to talk about that structure, he went on to say, that's a good question. I think our structure is unique, but it's not abnormal. The way that we're structured is Amy Adams Strunk wanted the football executive, so I report to Amy. Mike Borgonzi reports to me. Head coach reports to Mike. I've said this before. The league continues to elevate and grow. He talks a lot about the business here and whatnot. So he says, so I think this structure allows someone like me. I know I'm maybe a little bit unique from the standpoint I grew up in the industry as a scout, but it allows me to take some of those things off the plate of Mike. Let Mike focus on the team. Let him focus on building the roster, focus on the personnel staff, focus on the coaching staff, be involved in the sports medicine, sports performance, and player engagement, all that. To me, it really feels like, and I was talking about this with friend of the show, former host of this podcast here, Easton Freeze, about what exactly that meant. And we both came to the sort of conclusion here that, while Chad Brinker is Mike Borgonzi's boss in this situation, it doesn't mean that he's going to overwrite the decisions made by Borgonzi. We kind of came to the sentiment that a good boss elevates his employees, not tries to push them down. And it feels like in this situation, while he may still have this title of final say over all roster decisions, it feels like that is more in a way of, let Borgonzi continue to maybe make his own decisions until we get to a point where, maybe like a J-Rob situation, or we get to the outer end where it just is kind of, maybe the boss has to step in, push back and lead them in another direction. But ultimately, to me, this kind of cleared some of the air in which I believe, no matter what is being said, Mike Borgonzi is going to have final say of the draft board, of how free agency is set up and the direction in free agency, as well as making the picks in the draft. Is that what it sounds like to you, Stoney, or do you hear something a little bit different?
Yeah, no, I'm with you, JT. It sounded to me a lot like a lot of discouraging this notion that it would come down to like one-on-one, where somebody has to come in and just say, no, I'm right, you're wrong, we're going this way. And that's kind of been downplayed a couple of times this week. It just doesn't happen regularly. And I thought Brinker did well to kind of specify that, if they disagree on a player, and this was in the press conference earlier today, if they disagree on the player, they're going to go back, they're going to watch more tape, and they're going to work to get to that consensus. So in that sense, like I can understand why people want to know who has the final say, because that is kind of frustrating when you're talking about football decisions. You don't know who is who, but if they're telling you Chad Brinkers at the top and then Mike Borgonzi and then Brian Callahan, and Chad Brinkers telling you we're going to do everything we can to reach a consensus, we're going to go back and study more tape until we get on the same page. What that says to me is like, come on, guys, we have these two things separately. We're going to do everything in our power to get to a spot of agreement. But yes, I am at the top of the organization. That's kind of how the thing flowed to me. And I think that's acceptable. I think I'll put it this way. I feel like that's probably the best we're going to get from Chad Brinker. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you here. Let's talk about some of these comments that you guys have today. Eddie also chiming in here saying he likes Borgonzi, Borgo as he's calling him.
Yeah.
I just hear that and I can't really do a good Boston accent, but I just hear Borgo in like someone saying Harvard or like a Boston accent in my head, and I can't stop thinking about it. Richard Sider saying, I guess we get to see Levis throw some more balls in the retention pond, potentially. It sounds like, now I think it would be foolish for them to cut him in any single way this offseason.
Yeah.
You keep him around for, if nothing else, but competition here. However, like, cutting him, I think, would be a foolish move. Team Ramrod saying, no videos of the plane landing or entering the building to a standing ovation. It's time to go to work. It did feel like, not saying that Rand wasn't a pro's pro and a professional, but it did feel there was some sort of, and maybe it's because Amy Adams-Strunk wasn't there, but it felt like, let's do this thing. Also, they talked and emphasized about how they're leaving for the East-West Shrine Bowl tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it kind of had this air of, this is our guy. This is what we're going to do. Let's get to work.
Absolutely
a little bit echoes the tiredness and frustration of maybe having to go through this cycle over and over and over again. But at the bottom line, it just felt like it went so much quicker this time around. Z Dean saying he likes the structure. Sounds like anytime a player is involved, Borgonzi is the guy. Brinker will be everything else. I do think that Brinker still will have input. He is also going down to the East-West Shrine Bowl, going down to the Senior Bowl. It's a little different. It's a little bit different this time around than it was last year, I would say, for sure. Because when you think back to what happened last year with this team, the Titans, really only had Chad Brinker down at the Senior Bowl. It was him, Anthony Robinson, but Brian Callahan and the rest was putting their staff together. It certainly sounds like this time, Chad Brinker, Borgonzi, Brian Callahan. I've also heard that a lot of his staff also will be headed down to these All-Star Bowls. So it feels like from the get-go, from the jump here, they are kind of aligned and kind of have the goal to get to work here, which I think is a good thing. Z Dean also saying, I think it should be a reset for everyone, including Callahan. Everyone should at least get 3 to 4 years to get this thing going, or failing. Ed Henry also coming in and saying firing Callahan at the end or during the season is a hard sell after listening to the patience theme today. And that's something that I would, could happen. Would I be surprised at this point? No. But if Amy Adams-Strunk truly, by not being at the press conference today, by, everything going through Chad and Burke, if that's the way she wants to play it, I don't think she has a choice but to just let it play out and see where it goes. I don't think she can just reinterject here and say they need to fire someone or influence it like that. So that's where I am on it.
I think the best case scenario is still on the table, right? The best case scenario out of this whole thing is that they really felt like Rand Carthon was not doing a good enough job. They wanted to get a little more all ball all day about this organization. And this was the moment where Amy Adams-Strunk said, all right, there's been a lot of changes before, but we're going to stop that now. Now we're going to correct things now moving forward. And from now on, now we're in the patience period. I think that's, still potentially on the table as the best case scenario for this. Before we move on from the structure talk, JT, I did want to bring up Brinkers stairwell analogy. I thought that was pretty good, saying that Amy asked him to do this job and that she didn't want the head coach going up the back stairs and the GM going up the front or whatever, and then her having to decide, her having to make football decisions. So it's something that I've been critical of ownership in the past before, is wondering like, okay, who at the top is actually making the football decisions? It sounds like Amy Adams Strunk and company realized, hey, we do need a football guy at the top of the organization. Now you can talk about the merits of basically just looking around and seeing Chad Brinker and being like, oh, I guess you're it. You're the guy that steps up to this role. But I could at least commend her for wanting to have more football people at the top of the organization. And that's kind of where I land on this after today. I thought that was a really effective metaphor for his place in the organization between the coach and the general manager almost.
Yeah. And I think that's where your point was going, especially with this final piece of the transcript that kind of talks to the clarity of what it is and whether you agree with it or disagree with it. No, I think you can hear a little bit of that in what he said. And now some people, court jester of National Sports Talk Radio, seemingly just could not wrap his head around it. And you know what? That's okay. We allow them to go at their own pace and figure it out. But at the end of the day, when we asked, with football matters, was it important for him to have those football matters? Because that's what he said in the remarks after the firing of Rand Carthon, and for him to maintain that if he wants Mike Borgonzi to focus on the football roster, this is what he said. Well, first off, I didn't ask for it. So let's just start there. I wasn't like I went and said I got to have the 53. This is what Amy wanted. So it sounds like even that, like, she has her person, Chad Brinker, who is like, that is her guy.
The closest football guy around.
Yes. And they say, she probably said, Chad, go find someone who's going to take care of the 50. But ultimately, like, it's his responsibility to find somebody to manage the 53 is how I see it, right? Amy trying to take a step back saying, Chad, you're in charge of the 53. Go find somebody to be in charge of the 53. Like, go find an employee and manage them on the 53. Yeah. And so he continues to say, sometimes this happens in organizations that what she doesn't want is a head coach running up the back stairwell and the general manager run up the other side. And then she's got to decide on the football. She's asking me to manage the head coach, to manage the general manager and these decisions. And we work through it together. I do think it's overblown. The general manager, or I do think it's overblown. I think it's going to be important that you ask Mike this question, why this job was attractive to him, what he's experienced in Kansas City, as Andy Reid has the final say. I've mentioned that one of my mentors in this business was John Schneider, and I called him about this and like, hey, is this going to be a problem for people? And he talked about his time with Pete Carroll and how often does that ever come up? I mean, this is a we decision. We got to make these decisions together. I think there's maybe this notion of I'm going to come in and just like lay down a hammer. Like, no, we're not doing that. Like, we're going to be involved in all these decisions together. We're going to be working through it all together. And if we do come to a spot where we just can't agree on it, which obviously we're hiring Mike Borgonzi to make these decisions, the head coach to make his decisions, I'm not going to run down the hallway to tell him what plays to call. I'm not going to sit here and lord over Mike when that's his expertise to draft these players or to acquire players. I'm going to be a part of that. But if there is some sort of dispute that we just can't resolve, we're going to get in a room and we're going to talk about it and we're going to work through it together. Amy doesn't want to make that decision, right? So she's asking me to stand in place to help the organization move forward when it comes to that. And Jacob in the comments here says, is Brinker actually more out front than ever before? I think he is the person now standing in for Amy Adams Strunk in this point. Matt also saying, kind of going back to that analogy, Brinker is there to make sure the GM doesn't go rogue and convince Amy to trade AJ Brown again. Like, that's, I think that is ultimately, like, we kind of laugh at it, but that's the fail-safe in this, a check of power, if you would, right? And so it's a long-winded answer, and it was a lot of long-winded comments. But I think it was important to have this conversation with him. I think it was helpful to finally kind of lay this all out. And if anyone has any questions about that and whatnot, we're happy to talk about them here. But ultimately, it does seem like Brinkers at the top, managing everything, but ultimately Mike Borgonzi will be making the decisions on this roster.
I have a question for you, JT, since you were in the room for that. Where did Chad Brinker sit when he came in? Did he walk? Did he sit at the head of the table?
No, actually, Paul.
Oh,
Paul. It was Paul and Glennon at the heads of the table.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
The door's like, if the door's like right here, let's say the door's right here and the table goes this way, he sat in the middle, like with everybody else surrounding him. So like he was the first, if like things hit the fan, he could just run out the door or something. I don't know.
Was he late to the meeting? Because that's a power move too.
Maybe like 10:02. I don't remember. But yeah,
close enough to remind y'all y'all were waiting for him.
Yeah, I do. I do want to say I was one of the last few to get a seat at the table. We were playing musical chairs there, and it was a mad dash. But ultimately, we do end up being there. I do also want to shout out that during that meeting, we were all in there, kind of sending out quotes, and then Adam Schefter says, Chad Brinker in the introductory press conference for Mike Borgonzi, and then a quote from that. Terry McCormick with the ultimate power move just replies to Adam Schefter and was like, this actually wasn't part of that press conference, but glad to see that you were here today. Make sure to stop by and say hi this time. So a little spice today Terry in this this press conference. But nonetheless, we can move on to off of this I guess the clarity and clarifying things, and we can move over to the to what actually matters, which is talking about Mike Borgonzi and where this team will go from here, but not before we talk about our wonderful and amazing sponsor, ML Rose, with 7 wonderful locations in Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose, 8th Ave, Mount Juliet, Sylvan Park, and coming soon to Inglewood on Gallatin Pike. It's easy to see why I love ML Rose as well as you do, Stoney, because they have over 25 beers on tap. My personal favorite right now is the ML Rose Owl Lager. Love their fried pickles and peppers, their chicken nachos. All of their apps are absolutely amazing. I know you went out for a little bit of a date night last week and you got some of the pretzel bites. How were they?
Pretzel bites are the best in the game. They're soft, they're warm. They come with like a horseradish sauce, but the servers there always know what's up. They ask you, do you want us to get some of the cheese to go with it? And who says no to that?
Yeah.
So my wife doesn't like the horseradish. I'm not too big on like just shoving cheese down my gullet. So like she can have the cheese. I handle the horseradish. Those things come out fresh baked, man. Oh, it's so good. Best in the game.
Gotta love it. You know, they don't just have apps, though. They have snacks, wings, sandwiches, and, of course, their craft burgers. My favorite go-to is the Tap Room Burger, but you got to try the Burger of the Month, the Chopped Cheese Supreme. You tried it, Stoney, correct? If I'm not mistaken?
I did. What a fantastic blend of ingredients, bursting with flavor. They didn't have the hoagie rolls on Friday at the Mount Juliet location, but I said, I want to try this. They said, well, we can hook you up with a regular bun. I said, yeah, let's go for it. So I did that. It's got some adobo seasoning on it. It is what is all the peppers and stuff, jardinera, whatever it is. It's got that on it. Lettuce, tomato, mayo. It's so good, man. It's a really, really interesting sandwich that just pops with flavor.
Yes, I agree. And we talked about maybe ML Rose trying out a new burger next month, being the Borgonzi burger. And now that we know that he's from Boston, there's so many more possibilities there, you know.
Pair it with a Sam Adams.
Yep, pair it with a Sam Adams. That would be perfect. So, you know, ML Rose, hit us up. We have these ideas right here. Zach asking what makes a burger craft. The ingredients. Just there's so much higher quality ingredients around here.
It's handmade. It is fine ingredients crafted with care. That is the secret to the craft burger, and they've got them galore at ML Rose.
They really do, and that is 7 locations that you can go get those craft burgers and beers on tap. Thank you to ML Rose once again for sponsoring the show. We'll move on here, but not before we get to some of these questions, because you guys are absolutely lighting up the chat today. We appreciate you being here. And if you are joining us on Twitter or Facebook and want to get in on the conversation, like so many of you today, head on over to our 440 Sports and Broadway Sports Media YouTube channel where you can join the conversation. I do want to, before we get back into the actual, substance of today, Logan's asking, because we talked about it a little bit on Friday. What food are we going to witness Easton eat in a disturbing manner this year? We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of Taco Gate, whatever you want to call it. Zach Lyons in the comments here says pancake with syrup. He eats it with his hands and no utensil, like a toddler eating a birthday cake for the first time. Hey, I can't. I could see it, right? I could definitely see it for sure here. Couple other comments here. Eddie, yes, once again, new GM is going to be at the Senior Bowl this year, so that's good. They're going to be at the Senior Bowl and the East-West Shrine Bowl, where we talked about it a little bit on Friday's show, that the assistant wide receivers coach of the Titans will be working with the quarterbacks. More importantly, will be working with Shedeur Sanders. So there are fingerprints all over these all-star games, and so it should be very interesting here.
They're grinding.
They're about to get grinded. Brinker called it no sun. He said something. It was like no sun February or something, where he's in the film room from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Doesn't see the sunrise, doesn't see it set. You walk out and it's dark all through February. So it sounds like it sounds like that they're going to have a busy February.
Yeah.
Is that what you want to do?
Update for everybody. The cat is awake and he's walked into the office. So, oh boy.
All
right, never mind. He's leaving. He's like,
good.
Oh, you're talking into that thing again.
All right,
get out of here.
Let's move to another interesting topic where we talked about this disconnect between, it seemed like Ran Carthon and Chad Brinker were such on the same page last year. What was the kind of disconnect here? And so we asked Chad Brinker today in that sit down, what was the alignment between he and Ran Carthon? Where did it veer? And what was his involvement in the construction of last season's team? And of course, we kind of were hinting at, this idea that the Titans said they checked all the boxes, right? They got everything they needed. And of course, we know that is not the case. And so here's what Chad Brinker had to say on the idea. He said, I had a responsibility, but I didn't have the authority. We had great chemistry, and it's not like there was this weird thing going on in the building. We had chemistry. I was involved in this, and look, we had major holes on our roster last year, and on paper, it kind of looked good in the offseason. We got this guy and we got that guy. We went out in free agency and spent a bunch of money, and it maybe just reinforced, even for me, my core beliefs on how to build a football team, because it got us 3 wins and it wasn't good enough. He goes on to say that he really does like Ran and whatnot, but that is one of the biggest things for me, as they've continued to harp on this idea, draft, develop, retain, draft and develop, draft and develop. Seems like the disconnect, could very much have come by way of Ran Carthon spending a boatload of Amy Adams Trunk's money to get 3 wins. Simply did not work. And that was the final straw for a guy like Ran Carthon, where Chad Brinker was continuing to kind of enforce this idea that you have to build your team through the draft. Amy decided to go that route instead of, once again, another offseason of churning a lot of bodies, spending a lot more money for almost the same results. And so he went on to talk about free agency and whatnot, about, how they're going to attack it maybe differently this upcoming season. He said, I just think as you approach free agency, just be more selective in it. And really, we've got to make sure we're getting the right veterans in here that are made of all the right stuff and can be those leaders in the locker room. I feel like that was a little subtweet at Kenneth Murray, but we won't have to talk about that. Either way, he goes on to say, I appreciated Harold Landry and Jeffrey Simmons and how they finished the season. They played hard all the way through the end. And when you homegrown your own superstars, there is a loyalty that comes with that. I've seen that in my time in Green Bay, and I saw that with Jeff and Harold. They didn't give up. They were playing hard all the way through the end because they were drafted by this organization. They were developed by this organization, and ultimately the organization paid them, and it just means more to them. Not to take away from some of the veteran free agents that we did sign. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying if we want to build sustainable success over the long term, I believe that's the way to build a football team. And in order to do that, you got to have the draft capital to do that and have the discipline when you're sitting there and you're like, man, we really want this. There's a couple of players here that we can pick, but man, we have an opportunity to pick up some more picks, maybe picks next year or to move back in the draft. We've got to have the discipline to look at that and be able to decide if that's the right thing for our franchise or not. So with that, I do think that the free agency portion of what Ran Carthon did last year, even if it was exciting and even if it did kind of prepare them for, if everybody was healthy, maybe a competitive team that kind of skirts around 500 or whatnot. Ultimately, it doesn't work. And when Will Levis doesn't develop the way you want it to, it kind of looks like you spent a bunch of money for a worse result than the year before. And I think that ultimately is where the disconnect came for Amy Adams-Strunk, for this regime, and ultimately why I think Ran Carthon is out of a job now in Tennessee.
Yeah, and JT, something I've been thinking about since the free agency in particular was mentioned in these press conferences today is like just looking back at some of the moves. I like the addition of Calvin Ridley. I have, made excuses for Calvin Ridley. I think his separation was pretty good this season. He ended up being productive, 1,000-yard season, all that. I'm not even going to look at the chat right now. But it does, in hindsight, kind of paint the deal a little bit differently. And I remember Ran Carthon kind of talking about the process of how they acquired Ridley and how things you have to be willing to pivot in free agency, and how they had talked about wanting Aziz Al-Shire and Danico Autry, wanting to get deals done with those guys, but they opted to leave for Houston. I think there were rumors that they were in on one of the free agent tackles that fell through. And suddenly when you still have this surplus of cash, you've got to pivot. And so he talked about maybe re-entering the conversation for Calvin Ridley. And at the time I hear that and I think, oh, that's cool. Like staying ahead of the moves, like being open and not so rigid in your plan to be flexible. But now, like hearing all this in the context of hindsight being 2020, it does kind of make me wonder like how the people that are still in the building today that were also in the building last offseason were looking at that move. Like, did they agree with its prudence? Like, it's probably not the best deal for the long-term health of the franchise. And I wonder if that sort of pivot philosophy to spend the money anyway, and whether you get 3 players for it or you get 1, if that was part of Carthon's ultimate undoing inside the building.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think it paints a picture, as Eddie says, if Carthon sold Amy on 200+ million equals more than 3 wins. I get why she fired him. Still disagree with the decision, but I think it does paint a little bit clear of a picture, as Zach in the comments here says, what a king Brinker is. I've never seen such beautiful word salad before. I mean, he did do a lot of yapping. I will give you that. And he's also talking about Marvel. He's talking about Marvel rivals in our chat. Thank you, Zach. What is your main on Marvel rivals, Zach? I'd be interested to hear that, because definitely the most important thing going on today. Okay,
I don't know what that is.
It's a video game. So
I'm not in on video games.
It's okay.
Y'all have your fun.
Sounds good. Let's get to Mike Borgonzi first of all. Obviously we did a lot of talking about Chad Brinker. So that was, a lot of what Chad Brinker had to say, as he says, that's so predictable, Zach. Squirrel Girl or Jeff the Land Shark? You are such a Jeff the Land Shark main. Okay. That makes a lot more sense here. Let's talk about Mike Borgonzi. Stoney is just lost. Let's talk about Mike Borgonzi, who also had his introductory press conference today, was welcomed in as the newest general manager of the Tennessee Titans. I want to talk about, he kind of gives a little bit of a spiel at the beginning of his press conference to kind of, talk about who he is as a person, as well as an evaluator, and why he thinks he, maybe giving a little bit of his credentials here and why he is fit to take this job. And so here's what he had to say at the beginning of his press conference today.
Normally, I'm a Northeast guy with a funny Boston accent that loves country music. I'm a proud husband and father that believes in the power of love and connection. I have a passion for the game of football. I have a passion for people. I have a passion for doing things the right way through the values of character, connection, commitment, and communication. The identity of my leadership will be connected, it will be disciplined, and it will be detailed. I believe in what I like to call an us culture. Unity over self in everything that we do. We will put the team above individual agendas and make the best decisions for the Titans. I believe in the power of alignment and teamwork throughout the entire organization, where ownership, management, coaching, and scouting are all rowing in the same direction. If it's not, it simply won't work. My vision as a team builder is to draft and develop. We want to build a foundation of homegrown talent and reward those players that meet our standards. We will be relentless in our pursuit of building competition throughout the roster, whether that's the draft, free agency, waiver claims, or trades. And I think it's imperative that we build the right 53 on this roster as well, and not just collect talent. We need the right mixture of talent and character in order to build a championship caliber team. We want a big physical team in the trenches that is fast and violent on the football field. We want players that love the game of football, that are smart, that are tough, that are dependable, and they believe in unity. Make no mistake about it, the most important people in our building are the players. We are here to help, support, and develop them on and off the field to maximize their abilities in order for us to win at a high level in this league. And this will take the efforts of the entire organization to do this. In closing, I'm excited to finally start the process of building and sustaining a championship team here. I can't wait to start working with our scouts, Coach Callahan, and his staff to build the synergy that we need to consistently compete for championships. To the people of Tennessee, we will do everything in our power to represent you in the right way and make you proud to be a Titans fan. Thank you again for this tremendous opportunity. Tighten up, and with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Even the way he says "tighten up" is just
it is.
As Zach says, my favorite movie is The Departed. I mean, he's a Boston, he's a Northeast Boston guy who likes country music. So it sounds like the perfect fit here. Richard Snyder saying, Borg sounds so good right now. Get some players and show some results and I'll get excited. And I think it's good to get excited right now and see some veteran executives come into this building and look like they want to get to work like immediately, right? However, we all just have to stand pat until we see some results here. And I think that starts with what they do at the Senior Bowl, what they do during the draft process, and ultimately what they do in April. And then I think once you start to see that draft and develop mentality actually play out on paper with real tangible players, and we'll get into all of that, starting on Friday and then going on to there. And we can finally be done with all of this upper management mumbo jumbo. But I do think that, the vibes at Ascension St. Thomas Sports Bar today, very, very high.
Did anybody ask either the Big Borgo or Brink Lesnar if they were going to overhaul the scouting staff? Because I know that was rumored, it was reported somewhere that there would be changes to the scouting staff. I'm curious if anybody asked them about that at any point today.
They did. And his answer to that is that it's all still being worked on. He kind of touched on the possibility of still adding an assistant general manager. Things like that, I think, are still in the work. Ultimately, it's pretty hard to do when you're leaving for the East-West Shrine Bowl tomorrow. Ultimately, I think maybe you see some of that turnover probably post-draft. I think you go in with the staff you have, and then if those changes have to happen, you do it after the draft. I think it would be pretty silly to have them do it after they've already gone to the East-West Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl ultimately. So maybe not this draft cycle, but they have still continued to harp on the fact that, hey, we still may not be done with creating this structure that we want. And so that it's possible, I would say, but not for certain. Zach here in the in the comment section, I bet Borgonzi really relates to the scenes of the Heat where the entire Boston family is screaming at each other. No one asked him about the Hula Bowl, Logan, unfortunately.
Damn Hula Bowl.
I don't know. We should have, we got to meet him afterwards, after the press conference, introduce myself. The rest of the media introduced themselves. I should have, instead of introducing myself, should have shook his hand and said, did you go to the Hula Bowl? That's what I should have done. I did not, which leads us into draft philosophy for Mike Borgonzi and where they go, because Chad Brinker and company said some interesting things today about what they potentially might do at number 1. And I know a lot of you have been asking with your own theories and comments about what they could potentially do at the 101. But first, have to give a shout out to Sinkers Beverages, another one of our lovely and amazing sponsors, a 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year for good reason, because they simply have the best selection of beer, wine, and spirits in the Nashville area. Got to join their in-crowd when you get over there for all of their special benefits, allocations, and bi-weekly tastings that you can only know about when you sign up for the in-crowd. And if you can't make it out there, don't worry. They've got you covered. Simply search Sinkers on Uber Eats, and they deliver the booze to you. They drive so you can drink responsibly. Thank you to Sinkers for sponsoring the show as well. And so, when you talk about the draft, you have to talk about, the approach to quarterback and how it's unique compared to, everyone when they bring in these guys. What made Mike Borgonzi's approach to the quarterback position unique for, this regime and what his vision is versus the other guys they had and interviewed. And so this is also coming from Chad Brinker's availability with us this morning before the interview, where he said a lot of interesting things about the first overall pick, which I think is now our first time that we should label, and we'll make sure of this all off season, that Eddie points out it is lying season for that number 1 pick, which I don't disagree. But nonetheless, here's what Chad Brinker had to say on if Mike Borgonzi's approach to quarterback is unique compared to the other candidates as far as the number 1 pick and the quarterbacks on the roster. Chad Brinker said, yeah, we're looking at everything. I mean, that's probably attractive. That's a pretty attractive thing too as a general manager. I mean, what more would you want than be able to come into a situation where there is a lot of holes on the roster and you get an opportunity to, as the number 1 pick overall, and be able to flip a roster. I mean, as a general manager, that's exactly what you want. So we're going to look at all avenues as far as the number 1 pick. I mean, you can't pass up on a generational talent. We won't do that. But we also got to look at all the options available to us there as well, because we want to build the team for the long term. And I just know I mentioned this before. I mean, if I can map this out perfectly, I would love to have 30 picks over the next 3 years, and 12 of those picks come from the top 100. I mean, that would be ideal. That's how you flip a roster. That's how you get youth on your roster. And then let's be selective in free agency and try to find some of the right veterans to balance this roster out and to be able to show these young guys how to be pros. Obviously, it doesn't always work like that. However, let's talk about the 2 things in there that Chad Brinker said most importantly. First of all, they're not going to pass up on a generational prospect. Now, a lot of people, I think, were taking that online and taking that a different direction. It's Shadur, it's Cam, it's Abdul, it's Travis. To me, that really just read more like, if our guy's there, if we have the guy we think we know is going to be the best player for us for years to come, we're going to take him. I didn't necessarily think it was, we have a guy in our sights that we're going to take if he's there. For me, I know a lot of people have said that online, and Eddie saying it sounds like it also sounds like driving up the number 1 pick price, trying to do that to me, I think it was more so, him saying, if our guy's there, we're not going to move. However, you have to look at the other side of the ball here, which is they want to have 30 picks over the next 3 years and 12 of those picks coming in the top 100. I mean, right now, this draft in year 1 of those 3 years, they have 2. They got to find 10 more somehow. How do you do that? Trading out. And so I think that's one of the biggest things to me, Stoney. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think if you look at what assets they currently hold that are probably worth enough to get picks, I think you're probably looking at maybe some veterans. We've talked about Jeffrey Simmons, Harold Landry, maybe an Amani Hooker, just spitballing here, start acquiring some picks off those guys. But I think the most valuable asset they have is that number 1 overall pick. But they can't just come out and say like, yeah, we don't really care about any of these guys. We're just, make us your best offer. What do we do? Or whatever you got, we can make do. So I don't know. I just the way that he was describing the quarterbacks felt almost intentionally vague. Like we could be describing Cam Ward. We could be describing Shedeur Sanders here. So you always want to keep them guessing, that sort of thing. And it just kind of felt like a lot of smoke to me. So I don't think there's any way that it's January 22nd and these guys have 100% made their mind up on what they're going to do. Also, I thought he was going to say, I want 30 picks in this draft. And I was about to be like, bro, if you can pull that off.
But also maybe not the draft class to do that.
Fair enough.
Maybe last year I would say 30 picks, start going to town, but maybe not this one here. Let's hear what Mike Borgonzi had to say on the quarterback position alone. And we know, as we talked about on Friday, he has a very long history with quarterbacks in dealing with this situation, going back to when they passed on a quarterback at 1 overall at the 101 to go with Alex Smith and take that route, going with identifying a guy like Patrick Mahomes, having him sit, having a plan for that guy at the beginning. And so here's what Mike Borgonzi had to say about his experience with the drafting of Patrick Mahomes and his experience with selecting quarterbacks over the years.
You need to go in person and see that player, whether it's practice, all-star games. So that's going to be a very important part of it. And then just, sitting down, meeting with the player and have Coach Callahan, his staff, talk to him as well. That's a big part of it. When we went through with Patrick, we identified him early. It was a rare skill set that you could see. And we took it through the process in the spring, and we brought him in the building, met with him at the combine to really figure out his football intelligence, which was very high. And then we had a plan for him when we drafted him. We had Alex Smith at the time, and we were disciplined with that plan. There was a lot of temptations to play him, especially when you saw him in training camp, but we stuck to that plan. And that was part of the development of the quarterback. There was things that he needed to improve on, and we had a first-class person in Alex Smith that really took him under his wing and taught him that. So every quarterback's different in terms of the development and what they need, and that's the important part for us to figure out here in the spring.
Yeah, and that's his experience with Patrick Mahomes. As Zach says, it's the Geno Smith quarterback class. Relax, okay, fair, but I mean, this class, from people you talk to, may not be all that it's kind of being hyped up to be either. So definitely not the strongest, which could draw some parallels there. And so we did also ask Borgonzi, as I do like Jacob, the cyborg. We asked the cyborg what he thought, what he's looking for in a quarterback prospect. And here's what he had to say, which I think is a very interesting quote that he gave us.
Talent, obviously, to make every throw in the league. Accuracy, decision-making are big parts of it. The way you process coverages. The game's changed a little bit too, so having mobility, not just a pocket passer. And of course, the leadership part is a big part. They are the face of the franchise. They're your leader. They're the ones that are going to stand in front of the team every day, and they're going to follow them. And that's what they do. They follow, Patrick Mahomes. They follow Joe Burrow. That's what they do. That they set the tone. They're the most important you know, arguably the most important position in all of sports.
A lot, a lot of things there that could give you the Shadur route, could give you the Ward route. You know, really interesting, and it'll be interesting if we can start to decipher what, a little bit more past the idea of who they really want here. Going to be super interesting. Stoney, your thoughts on his approach to quarterbacks?
I mean, it sounds great, JT. I kind of come back to it's January 22nd. It's an introductory press conference. I mean, I don't think his words were any like revelatory look into quarterback scouting or anything. It's a little bit of, hey, this is probably what everybody's looking for in a quarterback. It's the details and the scouting process and getting to know the person that you really flesh out a lot of those things. So, I mean, it sounds great. It sounds great from where we sit today.
Yeah, I would agree. That's really all I had to take away from the press conference today, Stoney. Anything that you had, either from quotes or from that press conference in particular, that you found interesting? Or we can get to some of these comments here before we get out of here.
I've worked in all the shit that I got today, so we're good.
Wonderful. So we can get to some of these comments here. First of all, this one that is stirring up a storm here in our comment section, talking about, he did bring up, did you take that thanking of Landry and Simmons as goodbye messages? Not necessarily. I think that was more of just proof of concept of what happens when you draft, develop your players, and retain them on a second contract. However, I do think that it could be potentially time for both of those guys to be on their way. And I think absolutely, if you look at these guys, Harold Landry, I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Stoney, if you know, or Zach in the chat, who is the cap guy, but I don't believe Harold Landry has any more guaranteed money on his contract. So if you were going to move one of the two, I think Harold Landry would be the easier one to move. Now, what are you going to get for him? Honestly, if you can get a day 2 pick for Harold Landry, I think I would do it at this point for me personally. Stoney, would you agree?
Yeah, I would. Hell yeah, I would do a day 2 pick, round 2 or 3. Yeah, absolutely. I think oh man, I don't want to be projecting strays at anybody today, but I'm just going to say it. Like if you can get any draft pick, if people watch the tape from Harold Landry this year and they're still willing to give you any draft pick, I would take it.
Interesting. So yeah, I ultimately would agree with you without trying to drag too many people. Zach saying yes, no more guaranteed money. And then Simmons, I think, is a little bit different because of how much of vocal leader he's been and how much presence he has here. However, Zach here in the comments says he would get a first easy. I don't know if that'd be a little rich for me. For a first for Jeffrey Simmons at this day and age, at this point in his career, would be a steal in my opinion. But if you could also get a couple day 2 picks, I think I would do that ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would too. I think for me, the issue with Simmons is the injury history. I mean, he misses a lot of games, and I know, the vocal leadership is something that people say about him, and I know that he's a pretty disruptive guy when he's healthy and on the field. But I think you kind of said it best earlier. I think we are kind of approaching that window where both of these guys have serviced this franchise quite tremendously, but you might be looking at a point where you could get ahead of their potential decline.
Yeah,
and get something for them while they still have value in that regard.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. Stoney, so many questions about, what do we do with the first overall pick? Do you think that they would go back? I do want one more before we go here. Adam says, so players like Higgins, we don't need to pipe dream here with their free agent explanation. 100%. I think that if there's one takeaway, if Rand was still here, I would not be shocked if there were rumors that T. Higgins could come back to Tennessee. With this new regime, you can just look at what they've done in Kansas City and Green Bay. When is the last time they've signed an outside big time free agent wide receiver? I don't know. It's been a long time. So I would find it really, really hard to believe if T. Higgins would be even beyond their radar for them. But that being said, the first overall pick, talking about how Shedeur does at the East-West Shrine Bowl this week. So many good things coming up on Friday where we'll talk about that, as well as our Senior Bowl primer, which I cannot wait to get into because, Stoney, as I get deeper and deeper into this class here, this is going to be a Senior Bowl. Like, I think last year's was pretty good. This year's could be even better with the type of talent that we see down there. A lot of guys who I think may be on our radar throughout the entire draft process for the Titans. Super excited to get into all of that on Friday, but that's going to do it today for the Hot Read Podcast. Thank you again to our sponsors, Sinkers Beverages, and of course, ML Rose, with 7 wonderful locations in Capitol View, in Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose, 8th Avenue, Mount Juliet, Sylvan Park, and coming soon to Inglewood. And until Friday, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will talk to you then.